Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for Demystifying Private Financing with a focus on identifying, accessing, and successfully securing and maximizing private financing that works for you and your business. I'm Elena Gomez, the CFO of Toast and a Ladies Who Launch board member, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you moderating this important conversation. Women have only had access to secure their own loans since 1988, and that significant barriers still remain to fairly access and secure financing. But we, as entrepreneurs and small business owners, have an opportunity to secure much more financing in this area to support our scaling and sustainability. And there are pathways to do this that are good for us and good for our business. To help explore pathways to securing private financing, we're thrilled to have 4 extraordinary panelists, both business owners and investors, talk about their work, their partnership, and how this may help all of you. So let me welcome and briefly introduce each of them. Micki Krimmel is the founder and CEO of Superfit Hero, a fast-growing, plus-size activewear brand based in Los Angeles. Superfit Hero is a body-positive fitness brand with a mission to make women feel like superheroes, no matter their size. Superfit Hero was founded on Kickstarter in 2015 and has been featured in the New York Times, Refinery 29, Teen Vogue, and more. Micki is also a Ladies Who Launch program alumni. Alisha Griffey is the founder and CEO of Daintree Capital. Alisha spent over a decade as COO, CFO of several high-growth companies, helping to position them for successful exits either through private sale or IPO. Throughout her startup career, she saw firsthand the lack of diversity in both the founders and types of companies that receive investment capital. In 2020, she founded Daintree Capital to address these problems. Daintree provides working capital loans to female and other underrepresented founders. Daintree has funded over 20 plus founders to date and currently enjoys a 0% default rate. Denise Woodard is the founder and CEO of Partake Foods, a natural food company that was inspired by her daughter's experience with food allergies. Launched in 2017, Partake's first product, delicious, better-for-you, allergy-friendly cookies, can now be found in more than 8,000 retailers, including Target, Trader Joe's, Kroger, Whole Foods Market. In 2021, Partake released a line of baking mixes, and in January 2022, introduced pancake and waffle mixes. Denise is the first Black woman to raise more than $1 million publicly for a CPG food startup. To date, the company has raised over $7.5 million from investors, including her, Rihanna, and Marcy Venture Partners. Karen Howland is the managing director of CircleUp Growth Partners, a data-driven investment fund. Before joining CircleUp, Karen served as an independent consultant, providing financial service to small to mid-sized consumer-centric companies. Prior to that, she spent over 15 years at top-tier international investment firms, including Citadel, Barclays Capital, and UBS. Karen was also the founding member of hedge fund Two Ocean Capital, which later merged into Citadel. So with that, I'm going to start right at the top. And Alisha, let's start with you. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details of private financing, let's start with a bit of myth busting. You've mentioned that one potential reason why we don't see more entrepreneurs seeking, for example, is that we as a culture think debt is bad, too risky, and or means we're over leveraged. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, debt is often viewed as a dirty word. And, we talk about it as if it's a bad thing in general. And I think it's because we often forget that there are different types of debt. And when you talk about it, particularly in the consumer space, people think of debt as, credit card debts. They're carrying a balance every month. And it's difficult for them to get out of that cycle of, having these fully loaded credit cards. And that is a bad thing. That's a very difficult financial position to be in. But we forget there's the other example that people often are very, very comfortable with, which is a mortgage. Few people buy their home without taking out a mortgage. And that's kind of a comfortable example of debt for a lot of people. And so I think when it comes to businesses, we just have to remember, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And yet I think in general, often for founders and for entrepreneurs and early stage companies, there's this assumption that you don't want to go into debt as a company, and that would be, very risky. And yet, just like on the consumer front, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And so you just have to kind of think through what the opportunity is and whether it's a smart thing for your company.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I wholeheartedly agree with that, and have seen many small businesses have the good debt and actually thrive. So great advice. Denise, based on your experience, what were some of the misconceptions you had about financing before you secured your loan? And if you could go back and tip your former self on this process, what would you recommend?
Sure. So I would recommend getting educated prior to raising money, whether it was debt financing or equity financing with partners like CircleUp. I didn't speak the VC language. I didn't understand it very well. And so surround yourself with trusted advisors, friends who have done the same, investors that you can trust to be able to get equipped so that you can speak the language, so you feel comfortable having the discussions. And I think, there's different paths for different businesses, and really thinking about what success looks like for your business, what your growth trajectory looks like, and then putting together the financing needs that will get you there. And for us, it's been a combination of debt financing. I remember we had these large orders from a new retailer and we didn't have the money to be able to fund them. And so we were able to find a debt solution that was able to get us the money, but we also knew that we had cash coming in that would allow us to pay it back. But as we wanted to build out the team and hire more and invest more in marketing, we knew that equity would be the right option for us. And so getting the right mix for your business, I think, is what's most important. And then understanding what the ramifications are with either.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I really like what you said about educating yourself. Even as a CFO myself, I'm always a student and I can always learn, but my greatest learning comes from just my network. And so I would really echo that. And what's right for you may not be right for others, but really, really good advice. So now I'm switching gears a little bit here with a few of these myths busted. Thank you, Alisha and Denise. Let's dive into learning about who, what, and why of private financing. Let's start with you, Micki and Denise. What led each of you to seek private financing? How did you find these opportunities, and how did you figure out it was safe and secure pathway for you and your business?
Well, for me, I will start by saying I always, I've heard so many stories of like founders and small business owners not being able to make payroll. And I always thought that will never happen to me. I run a tight ship. We've got a profitable growing business. And 2020 and 2021 obviously brought some unexpected challenges, but also unexpected opportunities. And for us, the timing of both of those things put me in exactly that situation. So, we had really large supply chain issues last year, I think, as a lot of, fashion and goods companies had. We couldn't get fabric. Our factories were having issues with labor shortages. One of our factories went out of business. We just couldn't keep enough inventory in stock to hit our sales goals from an e-commerce perspective. And so that was like the first reason for the cash crunch. The second reason was actually an opportunity. It was our first big wholesale partnership, as Denise just mentioned. We had a big order with Kohl's and we had to pay for it, and so we knew I applied for the disaster loan expansion, the EIDL, right? So I knew that was coming, but we got caught up in the reconsideration process, which could take months. So I knew how much was coming, but I didn't know when, right? I knew Kohl's was paying us. I knew how much, and I knew when. I knew that was coming in January. So I was like, okay, worst case scenario, I have to make it through January. I know exactly how much money I need to do that, and I know when I can pay it back. And so that put me in the perfect situation for debt, right? Like I knew when I was going to pay it back. I knew how much I needed. So I started looking for the cheapest debt I could find. I got 0% interest credit cards. I got a line of credit from my bank. I did a Shopify capital loan. And then finally, I was introduced to Alisha and Daintree, and she was able to give me the last bit of capital I needed to complete the Kohl's order. And so, it was because it was a temporary need and I knew when it was ending, debt was like the perfect solution for me.
It's a great story.
For me, I'll talk about a time where I realized equity financing was the right thing for us. So Partake, I launched in August of 2017. And initially we started by me selling cookies out of my car. I did that for nearly a year. We went into a small regional grocer and we did that for nearly a year. And then we raised $1 million seed round in the summer of 2019 to help continue to grow the business. And it was in the winter of 2020. We'd had a really successful year and we had a lot of opportunities ahead of us that we wanted to be able to fully support. And so we decided to raise a $5 million Series A round to be able to support the hiring, the marketing needs, the growth of the business. And as I thought about what partners I wanted to work with, I thought about where there were areas of opportunity for our business. And one of the places was a lack of data. What innovation should we make? What retailers should we go after? What region should those retailers be in? And one of the things that made CircleUp so attractive when we met them, I was super excited to meet Karen. It was an all-female deal team. Our brand is all about inclusivity, and we wanted as many women and people of color around the table as possible. And so when I had the chance to meet Karen and then learn that CircleUp had this Helio platform that would help us make informed decisions about so many critical inflection points that we were about to face, we felt like they were the right partner for us. And I think, to my point of getting educated, like, I wanted to do that before I actually needed the capital. And so I'd already sought out and kind of created a short list of who are the well-respected investors in this space. And it's kind of a small world. And I think kind of everyone knows everyone. And so, talking to other founders and understanding what their experience was like, but also getting to know the CircleUp team. I was like, not only are they great people, they're also bringing a value add in terms of the Helio platform and the data and support that they're able to provide the business. And so for us, it was this inflection point where we felt like we had an opportunity to really grow. And then we got to make the decision of who do we think are the right partners to have around the table to help get this business to the next level.
That's awesome. Both of you great stories. I think something in common is just intimately knowing your business and your unique nuances. And Micki, for you, it was knowing exactly when your financing was coming and so on. And Denise, the highlight of your story was all female led deal team. Like, that's rare. So I had to amplify that. But thank you guys for sharing your experiences. Now, Alisha and Karen, would love to share what both of your firms do. And you heard these stories. How do you find women and non-binary business owners, and how do you support them in the life cycle process from just when they first start inquiring, doing your due diligence, and ultimately through repayment? What does that journey look like?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So CircleUp, we're a data insights company with a mission to discover and accelerate growth of the world's best businesses and entrepreneurs. I work for the venture capital piece of that business, the CircleUp Growth Partners, and we make direct investments into early stage consumer brands. We're exclusively focused on the consumer space. And we support our founders. We will take board seats when we work with them. Help them on the recruiting front. But the thing that makes us really different is the data platform that Denise was referring to before, which is a data platform that we call Helio, that goes out, and the mission behind it was to try to take bias out of the investment decision process and to take bias out of the decision-making, advice and education piece when working with founders afterwards. So I can go to my business school alumni, or I can talk to people in the other venture capital community and get a lot of same information as far as what deals are hot, what brands are really interesting. What we do is we have this data platform instead that looks at the universe, takes a completely unbiased view on what future growth prospects are. And so rather than using my own heuristics, I use data. Because of that, our portfolio for our first fund has 50% women founders and 30% people of color. Our second fund that we've just recently launched has 75% women and 75% people of color. I think the really cool thing about that is that's not a mission. That's not our intent. It's an amazing outcome of if you actually take your heuristics out of it if you broaden your network and the opportunities, then you can come up with these really amazing outcomes as far as diversity and inclusion. So Denise, we started engaging with Denise over at Partake because she was ranked by Helio as the #1 cookie and dessert company, right? It's like, clearly I need to reach out, and her brand is allergen free. It's better for you. The branding is beautiful. Denise is an amazing founder. So we use the data to really shine light on these brands. Then we get to know her and build a thesis around it. And ultimately we're thrilled when we were able to partner with her. But it was really the data aspect that opened that up.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Just the outcomes you shared are just impressive as well. And just curious, how long does that take, just to give people some perspective? You reach out to Denise, you get to know her. Is that a 2-month journey? Is that a 6-month journey? How does that work?
Our courtship was really fast, actually, more often than not, because there's a timing lineup, because we're equity investors, which is a longer term financing, right? You are partners for 5+ years often in that situation. So you really want to get to know the person. You want to understand, are your missions aligned, timing aligned, outcomes aligned, all of those things. So often it'll take kind of 6 to 12 months. And there's also a timing thing, right? Like I might reach out to Denise and we get to know each other, but she might not be raising capital for another 2 years. And so it often will take 6 months. Because we have this data platform, actually can move really quickly because we have confidence in the data. So it can go as quickly as kind of 3 to 4 weeks. But more often than not, it's a little bit more of a relationship play as well.
Yeah, great. Alisha, give us your insights.
Sure. Well, first of all, I love what Karen just said about, how if you use data, it turns out you actually fund, 50+% of companies with women. That certainly goes in stark contrast to what most portfolios historically have looked like, which is like less than 5% female founders. So, kudos to CircleUp for figuring out, how to use data to get to more diverse, set of founders. So for Daintree, the backstory is, it kind of goes back to something Denise said, which is, it's not that you should do debt or you should do equity and one's good and one's bad. It's that you really need a mix of solutions, and you might need different solutions at different times in your, life cycle. And yet all of the focus historically in the founder community and in the investor community is on equity financing. And equity investors often look for, 10x returns in 5 years. And how do you get that? You start chasing SaaS business models, and you want, tech enabled everything. So you end up starting to get with a narrower and narrower group of companies that are of interest to equity investors, because they're the ones that'll give those outsized returns. And so what you have is a very small group of companies that everyone is chasing. And in general, the tech community has not always been the most, welcoming and inclusive of women and people of color. So sure enough, a lot of companies are getting funded. It's not a lot of women. So Daintree was founded with the idea of, if what we want to do is get more capital to the people who are truly underrepresented, and we think there's a disproportionate opportunity for returns by supporting those people because they have not had access to capital, and yet they're smart and capable and have great ideas, then what you have to do is you have to bring an investment instrument to the table that lines up well with the types of businesses they're running. And that means you need to be able to support non-tech businesses too. So the more I looked into it, the more I realized that a lot of these companies really needed working capital loans. And it was these shorter term investments on growth projects that would help unlock growth. So that was kind of one piece of it. And then the other piece of it was that looking at the statistics, there's a lot of companies that die, particularly women-led companies, that die before they reach the $1 million revenue mark. So we wanted to focus not just on working capital loans, but we also wanted to focus on companies that had between $100,000 and $1 million in revenue, though we certainly go, higher in situations, but that's kind of our sweet spot. And that's because we want to help move more companies over to that, million plus revenue, part of the market, where there are a lot more investment opportunities, investment capital solutions available to them. So that's what Daintree does, is these smaller check loans to relatively small revenue generating companies for growth projects.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great summary. And I really like some of the points you made just about how there's a lot of capital once you get above a certain point, but oftentimes you just need to get through. I just know from working with small restaurants, sometimes they just need to get through the next patio that they need to build or something small, but it's actually meaningful for them. So I'm curious, and maybe this is really both for Karen and Alisha, how do you partner throughout the life cycle of the financing process? Karen, you alluded to it. You do some, you get to know the business owner or entrepreneur. How is it very different in your world, Alisha? What's that cycle look like?
Yeah. So, for us, it depends a little bit on what the founder's needs are. In terms of, is this just purely a financial transaction and we make a loan and there are repayments that happen? Or it also can be more of a mentorship and advisor, role. And that's really driven by what the founder needs. What I would say is, Daintree is relatively young. We're 2 years old. We've done 36 loans. And right now we're focused on that smaller side of the market. Our goal, and this year we're expanding quite dramatically, is to then be able to move to writing slightly larger but still working capital checks so that we can continue to grow with these companies. Like Micki's company is a perfect example. They're on the larger side of the companies that we work with. And we want to be able to continue to support companies like Micki's by being able to write larger checks to support their working capital needs. And then after that, I don't know, do we start to do an equity fund too? So for us, it's kind of going to be a progression that hopefully follows the life cycle of these companies and provides an assortment of funding solutions, to help make up that mix that works for the founders.
It's such a good point. I feel like that is one of the really, I think Denise touched on this also, was recognizing when you need credit and when you need equity. And your comment at the beginning about credit being a bad thing, credit is actually a phenomenal thing, right? It is an extremely low cost of capital, at least a lot lower cost of capital than giving up a piece of your business to take money in when the prospects for the business are really outstanding. And so really being able to find a partner who could educate you on, now is the time that you want to take credit, now is the time you want to take equity. These are the different things that you want to use them for, I think is really important.
Yeah. No, I think all of you stressed the point of really understanding the landscape and leveraging your network and going to things like this where you can learn a little bit more. So at the highest level, I want to ask one more question before we close out. We know it's the beginning in terms of what's available for these businesses. If you had one recommendation to share with our audience today, what would that be? And I really want to ask all four of you to comment on this. Micki, why don't you start?
It's definitely around learning your numbers and knowing. That's the foundation of knowing which type of financing you need. I've been doing this for several years now, so I feel a lot more comfortable with my numbers. I know it's not easy for everyone or natural for everyone. We don't all have an MBA. But that's number one, is like reaching out and finding help there as quickly as possible, because the branding and the design and all that stuff is the fun stuff, but if you don't understand your numbers, it's going to be really, really hard to reach those goals. So finding help with your finances as early as possible.
Good advice. Denise, let's go your way.
I think my advice would be, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think oftentimes, there's so much about entrepreneurship that's glamorized, and everything about everyone else's business looks so perfect and it's moving so quickly. But I think it's biting things off in these small bite-sized chunks that allows you to Micki's point, to understand the business at each specific point and understand the numbers and understand what's driving consumers, and then you can take that and stretch it a little bit further. And same with the funding, you don't have to raise all the money one day or get the biggest loan on the first day. Start where you are and work from there, and that's okay. And I think it's actually better.
Good advice, even in careers. It's a sprint, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? Karen.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Alisha. Go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say, I think my advice is don't assume that what works for other companies works for you. It's so easy to, particularly if, you're on, Twitter, or you're in these, founder communities, and everyone's like, oh, well, if you're going to raise a seed round, it's got to be, $1 million. They come up with these round numbers and this assumption of here's who you go to get the money, or here's the type of money you need. And different solutions really work better for different companies, and you really need to know what's best for your company. And then potentially, like what Denise says, kind of break it into pieces. You may need $2 million in general to really hit your, bigger growth plan. But maybe, 300,000 of that is for shorter term projects that could be better served with debt. Using more expensive equity capital to fund something like inventory financing really may not be the best use of funds, and maybe reserve those equity dollars for the bigger strategic longer term bets, and use debt financing for some of the less sexy things like inventory financing that's a quicker turnaround.
Great advice. Great advice. Karen.
Yeah, I'll just close with saying I think it's really important to be honest with yourself and honest with your potential partners about what your outcome expectations are. I think, especially on the equity front, like if you're getting an equity investment, like I said, it's typically like a 5+ year partnership, right? You want to make sure you are aligned as far as like when the timing of exit is, what that exit potentially looks like, how we're going to get from here to there. When things go wrong, like how are we going to manage that? How are we going to handle that? And so be really honest with yourself and the partners that you're working with, and don't change your story or change your outlook based on what other people are, to align with what other people's outcomes are looking for.
Yeah, all really great advice. I actually hear in all of that too is know your story, know your plan, have conviction around your strategy, and just be not worried so much about what others are doing, but really kind of cater it to your set of financials, your situation, your product, your business. So all really great advice. I just want to thank you all for being here. Incredibly great advice for everyone. Hopefully you've learned something today, but we're not done. There's an exciting lineup following this session, followed by a networking session and then a discussion on the benefits of securing women and other business enterprise certification. So I encourage you guys to join and engage with one another, especially during the networking session, and we'll see you guys at the next session. Thank you again for taking the time today.